I met Elena at the library's information desk on a Tuesday in March. She was reshelving returns, and I watched her pick up a water-stained copy of the Odyssey, turn it over in her hands like she was checking for a pulse. When she looked up and caught me staring, she didn't smile. She just held my gaze and said, "This one's been through something." I never found out if she meant the book or herself. Her hair was dark, pulled back tight. There was a small white scar on her collarbone, visible when she leaned forward. I came back the next day with a damaged library card, pretending I needed help. She fixed it in 30 seconds. I lingered anyway. By the third visit, she asked my name. By the fourth, she told me she worked nights, that she lived alone in a studio apartment above a bakery, that she'd moved to the city 6 months ago and hadn't made friends yet. "Why?" I asked. "Because people sense when you're not quite right," she said. I should have paid attention to that. We started meeting after her shifts. We'd walk through empty streets at 1 in the morning, her hand cold in mine, even when the spring nights were warm. She never talked much, but she listened. She'd ask about my family, my work as a translator, my dreams. Real questions, the kind that make you feel seen. One night, walking past a closed flower shop, she stopped and pressed her forehead against the window. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked. "No," I said. "Good," whispered. "Don't start." There were obstacles, of course. My mother didn't approve. Elena had no job prospects, no family connections, came from nowhere. My friends thought she was strange, distant, deliberately cold. Elena had her own walls. She'd sometimes go quiet for hours, staring at her hands like she didn't recognize them. Twice, I saw bruises on her wrists that she covered with long sleeves. When I asked, she changed the subject. She'd mention, almost casually, that she sometimes heard footsteps in her apartment when she was alone. Just footsteps. No explanation. I ignored the warnings in my body. By July, we were inseparable. I'd spend nights at her studio, and she'd rest her head on my chest while I read. One evening, she took my hand and placed it over her heart. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise that if I ask you to do something difficult, you won't ask why." "I promise." She closed her eyes. "Good." That was the night I felt like I'd stepped off a cliff and couldn't go back. For 3 months, we were happy in a way I'd never known. Quiet, private. She'd cook simple meals, pasta, bread, bitter greens. We'd eat by candlelight, and I'd tell her about the books I was translating, the way certain languages held secrets that others couldn't. She'd listen with her whole body, leaning in. In those moments, the strangeness fell away. She was just Elena. Just mine. Then came the diagnosis. The doctors called it rare, aggressive. She'd have maybe 8 months, they said, if the treatment worked. It didn't. By October, she was skeletal, her dark eyes enormous in her face. The scar on her collarbone became more pronounced as she wasted away. She stopped eating. She'd lie in bed and ask me to read to her passages from the Odyssey. Always that book. One night, she gripped my wrist with a strength I didn't know she had left. "When I die," she said, "I need you to make sure I'm really gone." "What does that mean?" "Don't let anyone else touch my body. And when the coffin closes," she paused, "stay close. Listen." "Elena!" "Promise." I promised. She closed her eyes. Good. That was the night I felt like I'd stepped off a cliff and couldn't go back. She died on a Tuesday, exactly a year after I met her. The funeral was small, Just my mother, Elena's landlord, a few library staff. I wore a dark suit I'd never worn before. The coffin was oak, closed per Elena's request. As they lowered it into the ground, I stood at the edge of the grave and waited. Then I felt it. A breath, warm against my ear. Impossible. The coffin was sealed deep in the earth, but I felt it again. Exhaled breath, and underneath it a whisper, so faint I couldn't make out words. I looked down and saw, just for a moment, the lid of the coffin move, not open, just flex, as if something inside were pressing against it from within. My mother grabbed my arm. "Are you all right? You're pale." I didn't answer. I was listening. The breath came again, and this time I heard it. A single word, repeated. My name, over and over, muffled but insistent. My name as if she was calling me down. I haven't been back to the grave since that day. Sometimes late at night, I hear footsteps in my apartment. Slow, deliberate, pacing the length of the bedroom. I leave the light on. I sleep with my door locked. And sometimes, if I'm very still, I can hear breathing that isn't mine. Elena was right about one thing. I should never have started believing in ghosts.
I met Marcus in the wings of the Majestic Theater on a rainy November night in 2019. I was painting a flat for the Tempest set, and he came out of the dark carrying a ladder, humming something low and sad. When he saw me, he stopped. The ghost light, that single bulb that burns in every empty theater, caught the side of his face. He had kind eyes, tired eyes. "You're new?" he said. "Stage crew, 3 weeks." I replied. He set down the ladder and extended his hand. "Marcus, I've been here 7 years." His palm was rough, calloused. He smelled like sawdust and coffee. When he smiled, I felt something shift in me, not just attraction, but recognition. Like he'd been waiting for me in that dark theater, and I'd finally arrived. We started meeting during night calls. The theater was ours alone then, just the two of us in the ghost light burning steady. He'd show me how to repair broken flats, and I'd tell him about my dream of designing sets for film. He listened like what I said mattered. He never asked why I'd taken a job so far below my education, never probed at the fractures in my life. He just offered his time. But there were complications. My parents didn't understand theater work. They wanted me in an office, in a real career. And Marcus, he had a heaviness about him that sometimes surfaced. Once I found him sitting alone in the darkness, staring at nothing. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched. "I can't do this," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Do what?" "Let someone care about me." I pressed anyway. He resisted, but gently. He'd mention, almost offhand, that he saw things sometimes. Shadows that moved wrong, footsteps backstage when no one was there. He said the theater had moods, that some nights the ghost light flickered even though the wiring was new. "It's just an old building," I told him, not believing it. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's something else." By spring, I'd stopped trying to leave. One night after we finished striking a set, Marcus took my hand and led me to center stage. The ghost light was the only illumination. It cast long shadows across the boards. "I need to tell you something, and then I need you to decide if you can stay." My heart was racing. "I'm not, well, the doctors don't have a name for it yet, but it's getting worse. The things I see, the gaps in time, there are days I lose completely, days where I wake up and can't remember my own address." I didn't let go of his hand. "I don't want you watching me disappear, but I also can't imagine doing this without you. So I'm asking you to promise me something. If it gets too much, if I ask you to leave, you'll go. No argument, no guilt. "I can't promise that," I said. "Then I promise to stay. Whatever comes, I promise." He pulled me close, and we stood there under the ghost light, and something passed between us. A ceiling, a doom maybe, but it felt like love. For 2 months we were almost happy. We'd spend afternoons in his small apartment near the theater, and he'd be lucid, present, entirely himself. We'd cook together, and he'd tell me stories about his family, about why he'd given up on life outside these walls. He'd hold me and say, "You saved me, you know that?" I knew, and it terrified me. Then came the morning he didn't wake up. His neurologist called it a stroke, accelerated by whatever was breaking down in his brain. He survived for 3 days in the hospital, conscious but trapped. He couldn't speak, could only blink. I sat beside him and held his hand, and understood, finally, what he'd been afraid of. The funeral was small. Theater people came, his family, whom he'd estranged years ago, and me, hollow and strange, feeling like I'd been carved out. The worst part came 2 weeks later. I went back to the theater to collect my things. It was off-season, empty, except for the ghost light burning in the darkness. I was gathering my tools when I heard it, humming, low and sad, the exact melody Marcus used to hum. I froze. The sound came from the wings. I walked toward it, my hands shaking. Nothing. No one. But the humming continued, moving deeper into the backstage maze, past the old dressing rooms, to a place I'd never been. I stopped following. Every night since, I've heard him. In the theater. Always near the ghost light. Sometimes just breathing, sometimes moving ladders. Once I felt a hand brush my shoulder, rough, familiar, calloused. And when I spun around, there was only shadow. I've tried to leave. I've applied for jobs elsewhere, but I can't seem to walk away from the majestic. It's like there's a rope tied around my chest, pulling me back to those dark wings, to that ghost light, to the place where Marcus is still waiting for me. Last night, I heard him whisper my name. I think he's asking me to join him.
I met Iris at a gas station on Route 40, late on a Tuesday in September. She was buying black coffee and a pack of gum, and when the clerk asked her how her day was, she said, "Temporary." I don't know why that word caught me. I was 32, tired, working a job I hated. But something in that single word, the way she said it like she was apologizing to the universe, made me turn around. "Bad day?" I asked. She looked at me like she was deciding whether to answer. Then she smiled, and it was the saddest smile I had ever seen. "Every day's temporary," she said. "I'm just more honest about it than most people." We talked for 20 minutes in that fluorescent aisle. She was a nurse, heading to a night shift. She had sharp cheekbones and fingers stained yellow from cigarettes she didn't smoke anymore. She mentioned that twice. When she left, she wrote her number on the back of a receipt and handed it to me like it was something fragile. "Call me if you want to talk about temporary things," she said. I called her 3 days later. At first, I tried to ignore the strangeness. She'd say things that didn't quite fit. Comments about not having much time, or she'd talk about her apartment like she was saying goodbye to it. Once, I asked if she was planning to move. "Something like that," she said. There were other signs I should have caught. Her family was distant, didn't call. She had no close friends. She'd mentioned casually that she'd stopped renewing subscriptions to things, that she was clearing her plate. When I asked what that meant, she'd changed the subject.
And sometimes late at night, I'd hear her on the phone with someone saying things like, "I can't do this to him," and "It's not fair to let him get too attached." But I was already attached. We'd spent whole nights driving with no destination. She loved driving at night. The empty highways, the dark landscape rolling past. She'd rest her head on the window and talk about constellations, about how stars were already dead when we saw them, about how we were always looking at ghosts. "Maybe that's all love is," she said once. "Looking at something beautiful that's already gone." "That's dark," I told her. "I'm a dark person. You should probably know that." But I didn't want to know it. I wanted to bury it. 6 months in, on a snowy February night, she asked me to drive her somewhere specific. She gave me an address on the north side of the city, an old cemetery surrounded by bare trees. We parked and walked to a grave. The stone was new. The name was Iris. My mother. She had the same name. She died when I was 16. Sometimes I come here to tell her things. I held her while she cried. And then she took my hand and placed it over her heart. "I need you to understand something. I need you to know that being with you has been the only real thing in my life in years. And I need you to know that I'm going to hurt you. Not because I want to, but because I have to." "What are you talking about?" "Just remember this moment. Remember that I loved you, that this was real." We drove back in silence. The roads were icy. I should have paid attention to that. For 3 weeks, we were perfect. She stopped talking about temporary things. She laughed more. She made plans. A trip in the spring, a little garden she wanted to plant. She said things like, "When we're older," and "next year." I started to believe she decided to stay, to live. Then she called me at work on a Wednesday and said she needed to see me. She was at the Overlook on Miller's Pass, a high point on a winding mountain road where people went to look at the view. I drove too fast. The roads were still wet from rain. When I pulled up, she was standing at the railing, looking out at the city lights below. "I'm so sorry," she said when I got out of the car. "For what?" "For everything. For letting you love me. For making you think I could stay." I didn't understand until she told me. The doctors had given her 3 months, maybe 6. A tumor that had been growing in her brain for years, inoperable. She'd known for 2 years. She'd been saying goodbye to her life in small ways the whole time. "Why didn't you tell me?" I shouted. "Because I wanted to know what it was like to be happy first, to have someone choose me, just for a moment, just before..." The car came around the curve too fast. I don't remember the impact. I remember her hand reaching for mine, squeezing once. I remember her voice, very clear, saying, "I love you," while the world spun. I remember her lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear over the sound of metal screaming. I woke up in the hospital. Iris was already gone. The crash had accelerated things. Internal bleeding, the tumor finally taking what it had been promised. She died in the ambulance. That was 2 years ago. The doctor said her seatbelt didn't latch properly. An accident, a coincidence. But I've played it over 1,000 times, and I've come to understand what she was doing at that railing. She wasn't jumping. She was saying goodbye. She had wanted it to be me at the end. She had wanted us to go together. Sometimes, I drive out to the Overlook at night. And in the curve of the road, in the exact spot where she was standing, I see a woman who looks like her, turning to meet an approaching car. I think she's still saying goodbye.